Hi there. So we're going to have a little look now at the media during the 2019 general election and what impact the media had. So the role of the print media has diminished really in recent years because fewer people buy newspapers, but it is still a factor. And we're going to have a little activity now where we look at some newspaper front pages, 5 newspaper front pages from Friday the 13th of December 2019, reporting on those general election results, and see if you can tell from the front page what newspaper it was. So you need to think the political views of that newspaper, the particular focus that they might have. Okay, so you pause the video now, have a look at those 5 and see if you can work out which paper it might be. Okay, so what did we think? So if we look at that first one, Johnson heading for a huge majority as exit poll predicts the worst Labour result since 1935, but it's describing that as a nightmare before Christmas. So that suggests that that might be a Labour supporting paper, or generally a Labour supporting paper. We'll have a think about that in a moment. We've got Johnson on course for landslide as exit poll puts Tories well ahead. We've got a picture of Boris Johnson with a puppy. So it seems like it's probably reasonably positive about the result, although it's not giving a huge opinion on there. Tories head for 86 majority in exit poll sensation. Rejoice, Boris set for thumping win. So that's definitely a very pro-Tory one. Exit poll predicts huge majority for Johnson. And there's things there about Corbyn likely to face pressure to quit. Shock early forecast predicts the Tories to get a big majority. And then we've got victory for Boris and for Brexit. So that seems very positive, both about the Conservatives and specifically about Brexit. So what do we think? Let's have a look. So the first one was the Daily Mirror. Don't know if you got that one. Obviously, the main Labour supporting tabloid newspaper. Got the Telegraph, the second one. So it's a broadsheet, but very much Conservative supporting broadsheet. The number 3 and number 5 were going to be the Mail and the Express, and it was just a case of working out which way round they were. But the Express had a really big focus on Brexit, and so you might have picked number 5 for that. And number 4 was the Guardian, which is normally a Labour supporting paper. It's not a huge focus on that on its front page. And that does raise an issue when we're thinking about some of the issues relating to the media in the run-up to the 2019 election, that probably it would be fair to say that a majority of the print media was supportive of the Conservatives, and even the Mirror and the Guardian, who were broadly supportive of Labour, were not particularly supportive of Labour's current leadership or leadership at the time. So that's one factor. Just some other media impacts in relation to the 2019 general election. Just brief discussion of these, and you can think about them a bit more in your own time. A couple of factors that came up. The Andrew Neil interviews, TV interviews generally, I suppose, were an interesting factor. There was a proposal to have a series of shows in the lead up to the election where Andrew Neil would interview all the main party leaders. In the end, Boris Johnson never did his interview. There was some sort of controversy around it at the time as to whether the other parties had been given the impression that all party leaders were going to be interviewed when they agreed to do theirs, when Jeremy Corbyn and Jo Swinson and others agreed to do their interviews. Andrew Neil's a very hard-hitting interviewer, and they were very, they were difficult interviews for the other leaders. And in the end, there wasn't one for Boris Johnson. So it's an interesting factor there, whether in the future perhaps there'll need to be more agreement about the, what media appearances, sort of set-piece media appearances are going to be before they're televised and announced. Similar, I suppose, with the televised debates. These came along in 2010 with quite a lot of fanfare. It was quite a big new thing, and they've never really been repeated in quite the same way. There's been some televised debates with stand-ins or other people being involved. That became quite controversial again this time when Channel 4 chose to empty chair a Conservative spokesperson at one of the debates. So quite a lot of controversy around that. There are a lot of allegations of bias surrounding the election. You always get these, of course, and both parties tend to think that the broadcast media is being biased against them. Obviously, there's bias in the print media. We've already talked about that certain newspapers are entirely upfront about backing one party or another. The broadcast media is meant to be very balanced, and that's part of the reason why there was controversy around the Neil interviews, because the idea is that you'd have the same level of scrutiny of all the party leaders. Certainly, quite a lot of Labour supporters felt that there was bias against them, and particularly against Jeremy Corbyn. For a number of years, quite a lot of Brexit supporters have been suggesting that the BBC was biased against them. You could argue it would be hard for the BBC to have been biased against everyone. Perhaps actually they were charting this quite difficult course between these different positions, and the more polarised politics is, the more kind of both ends probably feel that there's some bias against them. But it's certainly an interesting thing to look at in relation to the 2019 election, and to see some of the evidence for and against the allegation. And there's an interesting thing to consider too about agenda setting. You saw, for example, on Sky News, whenever they talked about the election, they talk about this is the Brexit election, and that kind of branding of it as the Brexit election, you could argue, assisted that to be the key issue, that to be the main issue that everyone was fighting about, whereas perhaps some of the other parties, perhaps particularly Labour, wanted to talk about other issues, about the health service, about austerity, about some of the issues where they felt they were on surer ground, and weren't really able to maintain that. So lots of interesting ideas there about the impact that the media had in 2019. There's also the issue of social media, which I've not put on the screen there, but that's also something to look at in terms of spending on social media, in terms of the effectiveness of social media campaigns, whether parties were targeting the right social media and the right voters, and where that might develop in terms of future elections and identifying particular voters. So lots to have a think about there. Okay, so have a go at the next activity.